And welcome back, Nats fans, to a special edition of the DoDcast. You're listening live on Thursday night. We thank you. If not, hope you're enjoying this whenever you're listening to it, as we got a special draft preview DoDcast. Yes, the draft is coming up on Monday night, first and second rounds on MLB Network. Of course, there's more than 2 rounds, but it goes over 3 days. Not quite like the NBA and NFL draft, but a lot of fun nevertheless. And to break down the draft and what the Nats might do, or some of the top players that you'll hear their name called on Monday, we have FanSide's resident draft expert on Call of the Penny. He's been writing up a bunch of profiles and doing mock drafts left and right. He's putting up the best prep out there. Ben Chase is here. Ben, welcome back. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks, Rick.
Anytime. So before we get into sort of what the Nats might do and what their needs are, I want to ask you about the draft as in general, because you've been doing this for a couple of years now. How has the draft coverage changed for you? Because it seems like it gets more publicity now than it did, let's say, 10 years ago, I guess, because MLB Network airs the first couple rounds now, but more people are talking about it now than normal.
It's, and this is something I, just recently talked with Carlos Collazo at Baseball America, and we had a chat about a very similar thing. He mentioned something that I've noticed as well. There are so many videos out there of every major prospect. If you go out and look, every prospect on BA's Baseball America's top 500 that they just put out, 500 players, you can find multiple videos on every single one of those players. We're talking obscure high school players from Alaska, and they have videos on that player, and multiple of them. So because there's so much availability of, hey, I can put an eye on that guy at least, there's a lot more people who can put out an opinion on a player. That's really expanded the amount of interest and the amount of coverage that goes into the draft now. And then, of course, obviously, you add on the fact that it's on prime time for an MLB Network for the first round. That really is helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at the Nationals pick at pick 25, now you might say you might not be able to get an impact player at 25, but you look at the past history of the 25th pick, you got names like Joe Ross, who's pitching right now as we do the show live for the Nationals, Christian Arroyo, Matt Cain, and more importantly, everybody's favorite 25th pick of all time, Mike Trout. So when you look back, Ben, at those 25th picks, what should a team that's picking toward the bottom of the first round be looking towards?
Well, one thing you notice, if you look at those 25th picks and look at the best ones that have come out, pick a high schooler. Because really the best guys in that grouping were almost entirely high schoolers. That said, there are quite a few recent ones that have not yet hit the majors that were really solid picks that I like. Specifically, the Padres pick last year, they got Eric Lauer, and I really, really like him. I don't think he's ever going to be a 1 or a 2, but he's the type of guy, he's crafty, he's a lefty guy. He's going to be a guy who can throw, he's going to be a good number 3 that'll rack up 200 innings from the left side for probably a long time. That's a big deal. Or I think actually, he is a lefty. Okay, I had to check myself. A couple years before that, you have Matt Chapman, who there may not be a better defender at third base in all the minor leagues. And, of course, he has this light tower power. He hits like 220 with it, but he has light tower power and can play exceptional defense. If you can play exceptional defense and knock the ball out of the park, they're going to put up with 220. Joey Gallo can still come in the major leagues with light tower power and does not play exceptional defense. You add in that defense, they'll find a place for you to play for quite a while. So even the college guys recently have been decent, and that's kind of the thing that I noticed as I look back, man, a lot of the studs are high school picks. So maybe that does lead some bad news if you're looking too hard at college. But they're also, one of the other things you notice a lot in the past 25th picks is there's a lot of pitchers there. So, of course, that also leads to a lot of variability when you have pitchers. You know that a lot.
So when when you look at a team picking toward the bottom of the draft, are you looking at, in a case of the Nats perspective, are you looking at addressing a need, or are you looking at best player available? We'll talk about the Nats specifically in a second, but for any team picking the bottom, is it need or take the best player on the board?
You really, in baseball, the development is such that you really should never pick for need, simply just because outside of the rare guy that can come up and throw a bullpen for you in his draft year, you're pretty much not going to have a guy who can come up in the year he's drafted. That is such a rare thing. Even if you pick first overall, it's so rare to find a guy who's going to be able to impact that year or even in the next year. I think a lot of folks got a little spoiled with guys like Bregman and Swanson here recently who were up within a year of their draft. That's not normal. That doesn't normally happen. And so drafting for need that's so risky. And so what you want to do, the need that you may draft for is, where's my system need help? And that is a need you can draft for. If you have a system that's all hitters, yeah, you may draft pitching just because you need pitching. So you reach on a pitcher over a hitter that might be the best player available. That need you might do, but you shouldn't really go for a need at the major league level.
You look at this draft for the Nationals, for their perspective, and looking at it the way we have, to me, it just seems like after the obvious need is pitching. Because right now you look at their upper levels, they don't really have a guy they can call up if somebody gets hurt that you trust. That's why Joe Ross, I would think, is still at the big league level, even though he's pitching great tonight. But you look at, I think the Nats last year took 3 pitchers in the top 10 in the first 10 rounds. I think they could, after losing Dunning and Giolito and Lopez, can you see them having a pitcher-heavy first few rounds of this draft?
Absolutely, and I could absolutely see it being very college-heavy too. They're in a good spot in that at that point in the draft, this year's draft has a really good flux of high school bats and high school arms that aren't great picks at, say, the teens, but right about the 20s and 30s, all kinds of teams are going to be excited about those players. The Nationals are kind of in a perfect spot going, hey, we might see a really good college guy just suddenly fall because he's not one of these high school guys that everyone starts clamoring over. So maybe instead of, the pitchers that are really kind of getting mocked to the Nationals right now, maybe a guy who Bukowskis dropped all the way to 20 in a mock recently. That's an elite pitcher. If he dropped 5 more spots, I think the Nationals might do a dance right there in the middle of the draft room to draft J.B. Bukowskis. I could see them really hitting the college drafts hard. There are some really exceptional pitchers that kind of fit that Nationals injured pitcher mode. It's one of those things they tend to find a Tommy John pitcher every single year, it seems like. And boy, I've seen so many ties to them and Clark Schmidt. It's not just been for the fact that it makes sense. There's some folks that say there's a lot of talk between the two. Could be an interesting fit. And maybe, I've seen him start to fall out of the first round. They might have a deal in place where they get him in the second round and get somebody else in the first. And they spend really heavy on those 2 picks. And Schmidt might not be a guy they see this year, but boy, he is a guy who could be an impact arm if you wait on him a year.
If Bukowskis drops to 25, I want the Nats front office to send Davidson a fruit basket. Because that would be that's it. Because I can't see it either how he would drop that far.
That would be absolutely reactionary too. Because I mean, he actually did. He had a bad ACC tournament too. So I mean, it really, but still reactionary in like a 2-week performance that you drop a guy from possibly a top 5 overall pick to 25. That's a little too much, but so
Yeah, the Davidson, for those who don't know, pulled off basically the equivalent of a 16 beating a 1 in the regional and knocked off North Carolina and Chapel Hill. They're now in the super regional against Texas A&M. But let's talk about some of these college arms. And you recently mocked a guy like, get the name right here, the pitcher from Oregon, sort of losing
David Peterson.
David Peterson in your mock,
Yes.
and I'm writing him up, I think, for either Friday or over the weekend. But another guy that a lot of mocks, I saw 2080 baseball and MLB.com, is Alex Lang, who was broken to LSU's #1 starter for them, the way he's pitched this year, and had a great year in his freshman year with the Tigers. And they've drafted SEC. They drafted Dane Dunning last year. Give me a little bit on those two guys at 25, or any other college pitchers that have stood out to you besides the Miracle Bukowski's pops there. But give me a couple other guys you like.
Well, Lang is one of those guys. He is really a two-pitch guy. He's got a curve, and it's been kind of fun this year to watch him. He's figured out how to manipulate his curve a little bit. He's got a hard curve and more of – it's not really a loop. I mean, it's not your 65-mile-an-hour, 12.6 looping curve, but it's got more dip, whereas he's got one that's a hard break that really doesn't even break a full plane, and then he's got another curve that's got a 2-plane drop to it. So – but both of them are harder velocity. And boy, does he really show some fun thing. I mean, watching him, that curve is really fun to watch. And, to bring back Bukowskis, his slider is one that folks have said is one of those, could be one of the best in the majors the second he walks into the league. Lang's curve is one of those that could be one of those elite curves in all of baseball the second he walked into the game. His fastball and the command of it has been a big issue. And then his feel for his change has been the other end. He is tremendous when he works low in the zone and when he can kind of stay consistent and on top of his pitches. And that's really been his biggest issue ever since he just got locked in that freshman year and nobody could touch him. And ever since, he's had little mechanical things, which, whether that's an 18-year-old that wasn't thinking and was able to do it, and all of a sudden now he's thinking about it a little too much every time he goes out there, and so he thinks about where his arm slot is rather than just letting it be. Or if that's actually he's got a legit thing, he's actually letting his arm slot dip. Who knows, but he's had some issues where he gets off to the side of the curveball, he doesn't get the same snap. Or he gets off to the side of it. The changeup is the bad one. And he has got a change that has some really nice arm side run if he gets on it. And if he can get that 3-pitch mix going, boy, is that there's a reason he and Alex Fido of Florida they had a battle early in the year, and you really couldn't tell who the better pitcher was. Now, Fido's going to go in probably the top 10 picks. Lang's going to very likely be sitting there around the range of where the Nationals are. So that's kind of interesting to me that there's, you couldn't see the difference between them on the field, and here they are going to be 15 picks apart at least. Peterson is a guy, he doesn't throw 95. He doesn't have a knee buckling curve. He doesn't have a slider that, runs up there in the upper 80s. What he does have, he has 4 pitches that are all above average to, and some days they'll flash a plus, where they're really exceptional. But he really commands them well. And for a 6'6" guy, he really beats well. I am just amazed at how well he repeats. And he just, the one thing, when he can get his slider on, he just buries it at a right-hander's toes. And that 20 strikeout game he had, I think, I don't know how many times it looked like the right-handers thought their toes were about to get chopped off. And they were either swinging over the top of a pitch that was just about to hit them on the toes, or they're jumping out of the way on a pitch that's crossing the strike zone, but heading towards their toes. And so they're jumping out of the way because they think it's coming at them, but yet it ends up crossing the zone. And so they're, I mean, it's just that action he gets. But from that 6'6" frame, that makes it really tough to pick up. He's a big guy, 235-ish pounds. So, I mean, big frame, handle. I mean, he could handle the innings. This is a guy who probably could move quickly. Wouldn't surprise me if you see him in Double-A next year, major leagues the year after that. I mean, that's a pretty quick bounce for a pick. Come up in 2 years. Now, do I ever think he'll be a number one starter? Probably not. But he's a guy who would probably – he's that guy who he could be a staff ace. I mean, he's a type – he could be like a Brad Radke staff ace where he was the best guy on a staff and led a staff for a long time. Constantly out there giving you a good game every time. So.
Yeah, the interesting you brought up before on Schmidt, I was talking with I tweeted the South Carolina play-by-play guy when I wrote the profile on Schmidt. They love his work ethic. His slider is really good too, and you can tell when you face that kind of upper quality pitching. You mentioned with Faedo and Alex Lang. Looking at the college pitching, though, in particular, how much stock do you take into those performances against the marquee schools? Because I look at Peterson, not a great game against Oregon State, who is the number one overall seed. Not a great game against UCLA. I think he lost in his last game there. And those are really those two premier schools in the Pac-12. How much stock do you take in those big games like that going into a draft if you're a team?
It all depends. You kind of have to see really the guy plays who he plays. I mean, you can't help, for instance, a guy like Jake Berger, who's a third baseman from Missouri State. You can't help that he doesn't face an SEC school every week. So he really didn't face good pitching all year long. Can't really help that. Yes, he showed tremendous power. You have to trust your scouts to be able to go out there and say, okay, that pitcher was throwing 88 and had no movement. That's why he knocked that ball out of the park. But they go out and they say, well, yeah, the pitcher's throwing 88, but God, everything was moving all over the place, and yet he still found a way to knock it out. So that's solid. Okay, there's a difference there. Yeah, he may not have the velocity to pitch in the SEC, but he had really good movement, and he still found a way to handle it. So there is some stuff there. One of the things Peterson has shown well is just that he, even in his rough games, he's come out and it seems like he's out there and consistently throwing the same pitch. And, he doesn't back off. He doesn't try to, oh, geez, my curve isn't the best pitch today, so I'm not going to use it at all. It's like, okay, well, then it's going to be the fourth of my 4-pitch sequence. But he still mixes it in. And all of his stuff is average to above average, and he knows how to really sequence that well. And so that's what has impressed me is he's not going to back off of his stuff, even when he's struggling. And that does show a lot, even when you have those bad games, because sometimes those are as important to watch as a game against good competition where you succeed, because when you're struggling, every stud has a bad game. We've seen Clayton Kershaw give up, how many home runs in the postseason, but yet then he comes out and he'll have the Nationals, but he had one of the better or the more amazing performances in a relief or in a playoff series last year. That was, one of those things that you remember for a long time. You have both situations. Still Clayton Kershaw, and the rest of his body of work, I'm going to remember that he's probably the best pitcher we've ever seen. Not the fact that Matt Adams somehow took him deep once. Matt Adams, who can't hit a left-handed pitcher for the life of him, somehow hit him deep in a playoff game. Isn't what I'm going to remember about Clayton Kershaw. And same thing, like, David Peterson got back up on the mound and he said, you know what, all right, I'm going to try this again. So that to me was impressive with him.
You mentioned if you look at the lack of competition, Jake Berger in particular, but another impact bat that I profiled that I don't know if he'll fall to 25. I don't think he will, because a lot of people think he could be in the middle first round is the guy to UC Irvine, Keston Hiura. I mean, yeah, he hasn't played the field this year, and maybe the best team in his league is Long Beach State, who's in a super regional, but Hiura has been out there swinging a great bat, and if the Nats could put him at second base, he's a guy that could easily rise up the system, even though they took a guy in Jake Knoll, who's playing well in Hagerstown from Florida Gulf Coast, but Hiura's got the bat that can play anywhere.
Yeah. He reminds me a lot of Ian Happ. They're a little bit, what I would say is Ian Happ is probably your guy who's going to hit 280 with big power, and Hiura is more of a guy who's going to hit 300 with really good power. So that's that difference of a little bit more power or a little bit more average for Keston, a little more power for Ian, but very similar profiles in that, you know, both guys who were basemen in college, but really could play the outfield too. And before he hurt his elbow, a lot of folks had him as a top 10 pick and coming into the season. And there's another thing, you're going to have that Tommy John surgery. How comfortable are you with a guy who's going to have that surgery as a hitter? We've seen a lot of variance in how that affects hitters. It took Miguel Sano, I mean, that basically wiped out his 2016. He was useless in 2016 at the plate. And now look at him this year. The elbow's been healthy for a full year, and Sano is a AL MVP candidate. You know, outside of that, you know, behemoth in Yankee Stadium. But outside of that guy, Sano's an MVP candidate. So
exactly. Looking at the high school arms, and one of our writers, Drew Douglas, got a chance to talk with one of them, Hagen Danner, who's a pitcher and a catcher. So really, Ben, we look at this two-part question for you. What kind of high school arms could be available at the latter stages, and how would you go about, we'll talk about Hunter Green a little bit, but evaluating sort of the two-way players? There's a lot of them this year.
There are, and it's something where you're not sure if it's a matter of a lot of colleges have started to allow this to happen more within their system. And so therefore that starts to trickle down into the high schools where they start to encourage it more. For instance, a guy like Nick Prado is kind of seeing your typical two-way player development. He is playing first base, not because Nick Prado is not able to play somewhere else, but because when Nick Prado was a freshman sophomore, he was upper 80s off the mound with tremendous control as a left-hander and already getting notice and a possible draft pick. So you put that guy at first base because you want to make sure he can make every start on the mound. And so you protect him by putting at first base because he also has a good bat that you want to keep healthy. So you don't put him in the outfield. You don't put him in, at third base. You put him at an easy position that's not going to hurt. Unless you have a guy who's also an elite defender when you get into the range of a guy like Hunter Green, who he plays a really good shortstop. It's crazy to me to see some of these guys. One of the ones that just got hurt, Joe Perez, picked up pitching 2 years ago because his coaches were just amazed at how he could rifle the ball across the infield from third base. He's bumped triple digits over the summer off the mound. Now, this is a guy who's probably going to go second, third round, and there's not consensus over what he would be. And then he just had his elbow pop. So now he needs Tommy John. So I'm not sure whether or not he's even going to go. Or whether he'll just, because I want to say he's a Miami commit, and so he might just go to college and be able to play two ways there and improve his draft stock and come out. But the high school pitchers, there are some really impressive arms that are going to be down toward the bottom of the first round simply because there's a lot of guys that there's not a lot of consensus on. You have Mackenzie Gore at the top, who's a lefty that a lot of people trust. There is Shane Baz who's a Texas right-hander who's got 5 pitches and can hit upper 90s with his fastball, but also has a really strong commitment to Texas Christian. So he's kind of one of those guys where if you don't see him go by about pick 15, he might just drop down into about the 30th round, because that means he's probably not going to be signable. But after that, there's really not a lot of consensus on the other high school arms. And so you could see a guy go 12th, or you could see him drop down to 30th. And there's a lot of those guys. For instance, one of the biggest names as far as the National High School Invitational, the Fall East Coast Pro, all these things, was Hans Kraus from California. Big, sturdy kid. I want to say he's, like 220 and 6'3", just big, strong-built kid. Fastball that can, get up there, good feel for breaking ball and a change. Kind of an awkward delivery. Scares off some teams because of that. But this is a guy who went out there, it seemed like every single championship game of a tournament, dog mentality, and would go 6 or 7 deep and strike out everybody and their mom's uncle, and would, hand the ball over to the bullpen, and, he'd be just, still wanting to finish out the game and hit a pitch limit that they had to enforce on him. But I've personally had trouble mocking him into the first round. That's a guy that, that profile is, that's a guy I would want in my system. And I can't find a way to get him into the first round in a lot of places, because there's a lot of guys like that are down at that bottom area. There's a guy like Blaine Enlow, who may have one of the best curveballs in the entire draft. He's out of Louisiana. Guy from California that's really impressed me lately, Michael Mercado. Very, very, very cerebral pitcher. But he's got the stuff to back it up. Kind of one of those typical high schooler that's rail thin now, but has the frame that he could build on it. But he reminds me a lot of a Braves prospect, Mike Soroka, in the way that he talks about, he thinks about it the right way. Really thinks about how he's going to set up all this stuff. For an 18-year-old kid, that's mind-blowing to me. And yet here he is talking about how, I want to, tweak my grip this way and do this and this. But yet he could pop out a 95, which is a little bit more than Mike has in the camp. So there's some impressive pitchers that are going to be around that area. And so if you're looking for a high school arm, the back of the first round through probably about the middle of the second round, there's going to be some really good ones coming off the board. They're going to need some work, but the projection is there that they could be a real solid fit.
Now, we mentioned the injury risk, and we know the Nats aren't afraid to take guys coming off Tommy John or about to have it or have had Tommy John. Lucas Giglio, Eric Fetty, Jesus Luzardo last year, mentioned Schmidt possibly this year. But the other interesting aspect of this draft is sort of the off-field concerns. And the guy I want to talk about is Seth Romero from Houston. Oh. This is a guy who could be a top 10 pick, and then he got kicked off the team. And a lot of people, I saw Baseball America mock him, I think, on one of their mock drafts to the Nats. And he's a guy that a lot of people will link to Washington because I believe, Ben, if correct me if I'm wrong, he's a Scott Boras client.
There is that, and there's something to the effect of, I believe there was some connection with the front office, and I don't remember. I've read there's some connection with the Nationals front office, and I couldn't tell you exactly what it is off the top of my head. I have to go back and look it up. Which, that's, to me, that's about the only team who only has one first-round pick that I could see picking him before he gets to the second round. There's a few teams that have those comp picks or the collective the collective bargaining. I could see them taking a stab at it. One of the big rumors you're starting to hear is that the Marlins really would love to see him get down to, what is it? They have 36, very last one of the first round. They'd really like to see him fall all the way there. And I know I've mocked him there a couple of times, but I don't know. Just to me, when you know you have tens of millions of dollars looking you in the face, and you go and pick a fight with the teammate, there's just something about that to me there's something not in the right spot. There's and we saw that with a good example here. Michael Kopech with the Red Sox got himself into trouble for getting into a fight with a teammate, and now is probably the best pitching prospect in baseball, depending on who you ask. But immediately the day after, he came out and said, I was in the wrong here. I did something I shouldn't have. I pushed things too far. This was my fault. The fact that I'm now injured, that's my stupidity. And I blame myself. Never heard that out of Romero. To me, that there's just something there that there's never been that remorse of, hey, I understand that I did something wrong here. Now, whether you believe pot is a bad thing or not, the fact that he got bumped off the team a couple of times for smoking pot, okay, I can understand if you're wanting to defend him for that. But then you know that you're on your last straw and you go and you're picking fights with teammates. Mm-hmm. There's just something about that come on, you're already in trouble here. Don't push that. So I don't. To me, I would really struggle. And just if you want a little clue as to what's going to be on the mock that I put out on Sunday, he's not going to end up on there because I will not be able as a GM for any team to find a way to pick him in the first 36 picks. Now, that said, if I'm sitting there as a GM in the third round, fourth round, I might start to think about, boy, how much money have I saved over my first few rounds? Could I make an offer here and get him on my squad? Because at that point, maybe he's starting to think about, okay, maybe I did something I shouldn't have, and maybe I should accept some lesser money than I once thought I was going to get. It starts to change the dynamic a little bit. But for me, that would be a really tough guy to pick. But, jeez, that stuff good. It's so stinking good to watch his pitches. I can't imagine that he'd fall out of the top 10 if he would have just kept his nose closed this season.
So when you look then at the last question, at least when you look at the Twins at number 1, and it seems like a lot of people like Kyle Wright at a Vanderbilt with that pick. You got Hunter Green, just the two-way pitcher shortstop at a high school. Brendan McKay, the pitcher, two-way player at a Louisville. I think pitcher first base, I think it is with him.
Yeah.
So what do you think the Twins will do with the pick, and what would you do with the pick?
Well, I kind of have the bonus of I've got a couple buddies who do a lot of work with the Twins. Living up in this area, up in the upper Midwest, I'm kind of ready to go to Twins territory and chat with Twins fans. So I've gotten involved with some Twins message boards, and one of them happens to have a guy who's really tight with the Twins scouting community. So he knows I'm in the Twins draft room a lot of the time, and boy, the way he's kind of talked for a long time, he's struggling, and that's not something I've heard out of him as far as getting an idea of where the Twins are going. And he really thinks in his mind, it's down to 2 players in that they really, really, really like Wright. All right. Everything they say about Hunter Green the way they say it is the way that they said stuff about guys like Kirilloff last year. It's the way that they said stuff about, and he'll start rattling off all these guys that they've picked that they weren't ever tied to. They put out a smokescreen that they weren't interested. And he said it's worded almost word for word like the stuff that they put out on these other players. And while the Twins do have a new general manager in place, they did keep a lot of the scouting department that was in place. So some of those same scouting reports and scouting things are going to be the same. And that part is a little bit interesting, where if you're starting to hear some of that same language from the scouting department, it makes you kind of wonder a little bit. So I would say that it's probably about a 75-25 right now. But there's still that 25% chance that it's going to be Hunter Green taken first overall. And they're just going to roll the dice with the best overall prospect on everyone's board. So it's hard to kind of gauge that, just because when you have someone who's kind of in the know and that person can't even get a good gauge, it kind of tells you where the team might be. So
that's going to be one of the more exciting selections Monday night. So, Ben, as we wrap up here, how can listeners follow you on Twitter, and want to run through all your coverage you got going up until the draft? Feel free to do so.
Yeah, I am on Tomahawk Take covering the Braves, which I know most of you are going to want to chew me out for, but that's okay. And I'll do a lot of the minor league coverage there. Call to the Pen, I kind of cover a lot of different aspects there, but I do have a little series I'm doing right now on the 5 through 1, number 5 through the number 1 pick in the 2000s, and then also have a mock that I did this last Wednesday, and then I'll do one on Sunday that's all of who I would pick if I were the GM. That'll be my final mock draft before the draft. Want to follow me on Twitter? It's Big Gentle Ben. And that's the easiest way to find. I do a lot of self-promotion as far as my stuff off of almost every one of those articles. So if you're wanting to find any of my work, you can usually just go down stuff that I've retweeted on there. And that's usually a good way to find it. So
if you want information on any Braves, I'm talking any Braves minor leaguer, from Gwinnett onto like Danville, or like the Gulf Coast, or Ben's got it all.
Started, Dominican Summer League just started.
Dominican Summer League, yeah. You got a preview for that too. So if you need anything on the Braves, any player, Ben's got something on him, and he's got great draft coverage. So if you want the fan side of perspective on the draft, go there Monday night for Ben's take. I'll be covering at least round 1 and 2 for District on Deck. So it should be a lot of fun. Ben, again, thanks for taking the time. Greatly appreciate it. Keep up the great work, and we'll talk again real soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Rick.
No problem. So again, guys, enjoy the draft. Ron will be with you coming up if you're listening live on the post game for Nats Orioles. And we'll see you guys the next time. Thanks for tuning in to the MLB Draft preview show here on the DoDcast.